What would you do if, in one single, reckless moment, you crossed a line so definitive you could never find your way back? I never believed I was capable of such a transgression. I was Lillian Hayes, a good wife. Devoted, patient, the kind of woman who packed her husband's lunches for his business trips, who remembered the anniversaries of relatives he'd long forgotten, who smiled through the quiet, accumulating disappointments of a marriage that had lost its essential spark. But then the storm came, a biblical deluge that knocked out the power, and in the suffocating, intimate darkness, with my body pressed against his, I discovered a hunger so profound, so terrifying, it threatened to consume what was left of my carefully constructed life. This is the story of how I crossed a sacred boundary with the one person I never should have, an act that would not only shatter my marriage, but also redefine the very essence of who I thought I was. The night everything irrevocably changed began with the rain. It had been relentless all evening, hammering against the sprawling windows of our suburban Chicago home like an impatient, demanding lover. A low growl of thunder rolled in the distance, making the air feel heavy, charged with a restless, almost predatory energy. I remember standing in the vast, silent kitchen, my hands methodically wiping a countertop that was already spotless, listening to the rhythmic drumming of the storm. My husband Thomas was away, another business trip, another city, another empty side of our king-sized bed. The house was too quiet, its silence amplifying my own gnawing loneliness. My stepson Lucas was home though, 22 years old, all lean muscle and a quiet, brooding confidence. He was the kind of young man who moved through the world as if he knew exactly what he wanted and had no qualms about taking it. He possessed his father's sharp, determined jawline, but his eyes were his mother's, dark, knowing, and unsettlingly perceptive. They were eyes that always seemed to linger a second too long when he thought I wasn't looking. I had spent the better part of a year telling myself I was imagining it, that it was a projection of my own dissatisfaction. Then the lights went out. A brilliant, jagged crack of lightning split the sky, and the house was plunged into an abrupt, profound darkness. The ambient hum of the refrigerator died. The television screen blinked into oblivion. Suddenly, the only sounds were the violent lashing of the rain and the frantic, sudden quickening of my own breath. "Wow," Lucas muttered from the living room, his voice a low rumble in the dark. I fumbled for my phone on the counter, my fingers clumsy, and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut a shaky, nervous path through the oppressive blackness. "Power's out," I said, stating the obvious, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "Yeah, no kidding." His voice was closer than I had expected. I turned, and my heart gave a hard, painful lurch. He was standing barely a foot away. The flashlight cast sharp, dramatic shadows across his face, highlighting the sensual curve of his lips, the way his damp t-shirt clung to the hard planes of his chest. He must have just come from the home gym in the basement. I could smell the faint, primal musk of his exertion, something elemental beneath the clean, sharp scent of his body wash. My throat went dry. Did you check the breaker?" I asked, my voice too quick, too high. "Yeah. It's the whole neighborhood." "The storm." He shifted his weight, and in the dim, dancing light, I saw his gaze drop, just for a fraction of a second, to the V-neck of my silk blouse. I should have stepped back. I should have made some flimsy excuse, fled upstairs, and locked myself in my bedroom until the reassuring light of morning. But I didn't. I was rooted to the spot, caught in the tractor beam of his gaze, and then I tripped. A loose corner of the antique rug, a stupid, clumsy misstep. My ankle twisted, and I lurched forward with a sharp, undignified gasp. Lucas caught me, his reflexes impossibly fast, his hands clamping onto my waist with a surprising firmness. But the momentum was too much for both of us. We crashed onto the oversized living room couch, a chaotic tangle of limbs, with me landing on top of him, my legs instinctively straddling his hips. And that's when I realized the palpable tension between us had breached its containment field and crossed into dangerous, uncharted territory. His body reacted before his mind could hide it, a hard, undeniable ridge of desire pressing against me, and mine. God help me. My body responded in kind. A searing heat flooded my cheeks, pooling low in my stomach. My breath hitched as I tried to push myself up, to regain some semblance of control, but his grip tightened, holding me in place, locking me against him. For one single, endless, terrifying second, neither of us moved. The air between us was electric, thick with unspoken words and dangerous possibilities. I could feel his heartbeat hammering against my own, rapid and unsteady. His breath was warm and moist against my lips. I wanted it. And then his hands began to slide up my sides, slow, deliberate, mapping the curve of my ribs through the thin silk of my blouse. "Lillian," he whispered, my name a rough, desperate sound on his lips. His only answer was a ragged exhale, his hips shifting beneath me with a subtle, intentional roll, a silent, explicit confirmation of just how much he wanted this. Wanted me. I didn't stop it. Instead, I leaned down, and in the absolute darkness, with the storm raging outside like a reflection of the tempest within me, a moment of profound weakness, of long-suppressed hunger, turned into a kiss that should never, ever have happened. My name is Lillian Hayes, and before that night, before the storm, before the power outage, before him, I was someone else entirely. I was the kind of woman people described as steady, reliable, the sort of wife who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who made sure the house was spotless before guests arrived, who never let the wine run dry at dinner parties. Thomas, my husband, called me his rock. It was meant as a compliment, I suppose, though over the years it had begun to feel more like a life sentence, a heavy, unyielding stone I was destined to carry. I met Thomas 10 years ago at a lavish charity gala in downtown Chicago. He was handsome in that polished, powerful corporate way, salt and pepper hair meticulously styled, a Rolex that cost more than my first car, a confident smile that promised unwavering stability. I was 32 then, freshly and painfully divorced, still nursing the deep, ragged wounds of a marriage that had crumbled under the crushing weight of my ex-husband's serial infidelity. Thomas was the antithesis of my ex. He was solid, predictable, safe. We married after a whirlwind year of what he called courtship, and what I now recognize as a strategic acquisition. He swept me off my feet in the way only a man with immense wealth and unshakable confidence can. Lavish vacations to exotic locales, whispered promises of a secure, worry-free future, and eventually this sprawling home in a pristine suburb where the lawns were always perfectly manicured and the neighbors never raised their voices. And then there was Lucas. He was 21 when I first met him, a whirlwind of brooding silences and palpable resentment still raw from his own parents' acrimonious divorce. His mother, Thomas's first wife, had decamped to a villa in Italy with her new younger husband, leaving Lucas behind like an inconvenient piece of luggage. I tried to be kind, to be maternal, but Lucas wasn't interested in a replacement mom. He was, however, interested in watching me. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, a projection of my own loneliness. The way his gaze would linger when I bent to pick something up, the way he'd offer a sly, knowing smirk when Thomas wasn't looking, as if we shared a secret that even I wasn't privy to. I ignored it. I had to ignore it because I was Lillian Hayes, the good wife, the stable one, the rock. Until the night I wasn't. The cracks beneath the polished surface of our perfect life had been forming for years. Thomas traveled more often than not, leaving me alone in that big, empty house with nothing but my echoing thoughts and the occasional perfunctory text message assuring me he'd be home soon, next week, next month, after this big deal closes. I told myself I didn't mind the solitude, that I valued my independence. But then I'd catch Lucas watching me across the dinner table, his knee accidentally brushing mine beneath it, and something tight and unfamiliar would twist deep inside me. It wasn't just him, I see that now. It was me, too. The way I had started dressing differently when I knew he'd be home. A slightly lower neckline, a sweater that clung a little more snugly. The way I'd linger in the kitchen when he was there, pretending not to notice how his eyes traced the curve of my waist as I reached for a glass in the high cupboard. I was playing with fire, and God forgive me, I loved the dangerous, exhilarating heat. The night of the storm, the power outage should have been a minor inconvenience. But then I was in his arms. Then I was on top of him. Then I felt the undeniable proof of his desire. And when our lips finally met in the charged darkness, something fragile and essential inside me shattered into a million pieces. His kiss wasn't gentle. It was ravenous, desperate, the kiss of a man starved. His hands were everywhere, in my hair, on my hips, pulling me closer, tighter, until there was no space, no air left between us. I should have stopped. I know I should have. When the lights suddenly flickered back on, we sprang apart like guilty, terrified teenagers caught in the act. Lucas's lips were swollen, his pupils blown wide, his chest rising and falling as if he'd just run a mile. I couldn't look at him, and yet I couldn't look away. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? I'm your stepmother. We just crossed a line from which there is no return. This can never happen again. But as I fled to my room, my body still humming with the illicit memory of his touch, I knew one thing with a sickening, terrifying certainty. It would happen again. The lie that started the avalanche began the next morning. I woke up to my husband's text, blinking on my phone. Flight delayed. Storms on the East Coast. Won't be home until Thursday. 3 more days. 3 more days of this infernal heat in my veins, this corrosive guilt in my throat, this vivid, haunting memory of Lucas's mouth on mine. I dressed with meticulous care. A silk blouse Thomas had bought me in Paris, the one he said matched my eyes. Black slacks that hugged my hips. Expensive perfume dabbed at my wrists, my collarbone. For myself, I lied to my reflection. Downstairs, Lucas was already in the kitchen, shirtless, scrambling eggs as if nothing had happened. The muscles in his back flexed as he moved, and my stomach tightened into a hard, painful knot. He turned when he heard me enter. His eyes raked over me, slow, deliberate, proprietary. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. I should have turned and walked away. Instead, I stepped closer. The first time it happened again was in the laundry room, a ridiculously mundane place for an illicit affair to begin, between the cloying scent of fabric softener and the low rhythmic rumble of the dryer. With the morning sun bleeding through the tiny basement window, I'd gone in to grab a clean towel. Lucas followed. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound unnaturally loud in the small space. Neither of us spoke. Then his hands were on me, turning me, pressing me back against the washing machine as it vibrated beneath us. "I wanted this," he growled. His mouth crashed into mine, hotter than the night before, hungrier, more demanding. I gasped into his kiss, and he swallowed the sound, his fingers digging into the soft flesh of my hips. "Tell me to stop." He breathed against my lips, a challenge, not a question. I didn't. I arched into him, my back thudding against the machine as the cycle switched on. Water rushed in, the drums spinning to life beneath me. Lucas smirked. "Guess we're not the only ones getting wet today." I kissed his chest, laughing a breathless, giddy, horrified laugh. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Then his mouth was on my neck, his knee nudging my legs apart, and all coherent thought, all semblance of morality, vanished. There was only this raw, desperate need. Afterward, I expected regret. I waited for the shame, the self-loathing to wash over me. It never came. Just this insatiable need coiled deep in my belly, sharper and more potent than any shame. Lucas traced idle, lazy circles on my bare shoulder as we lay tangled in the sheets of his bed. His room. God, his childhood room. the baseball trophies and debate team medals still lining the shelves, silent, judging witnesses to our transgression. "You're thinking too loud," he murmured against my hair. I was thinking about Thomas. About how he'd kiss me goodbye without looking up from his phone. About how he hadn't truly touched me, not with real desire, in months. About how, in this moment, tangled in his son's bed, I didn't care. Lucas rolled on top of me, his weight familiar already, pinning me down. He nipped my earlobe. "He doesn't deserve you," he whispered. And when his hips rocked against mine, I let myself believe him. We got reckless. Quick, frantic couplings when Thomas worked late. My hands fisted in Lucas's hair as he knelt between my thighs in his father's sacrosanct home office. The lines between mistake and desire blurred into non-existence during stolen moments we should have resisted. Once, we almost got caught. Thomas came home early from a boys' night out. Lucas barely had time to yank his jeans up before his father's key turned in the lock. I smoothed my skirt, my pulse hammering a frantic, panicked rhythm as Thomas walked in, clueless, smiling, pressing an absent-minded kiss to my cheek. "Missed you," he said. Behind his father's back, Lucas smirked. That night, I cried in the shower, the hot water scalding my skin. Then I texted Lucas the moment Thomas fell asleep. It couldn't last, I knew that. But when we lost ourselves in another reckless, desperate embrace, and he whispered, "You're mine now," I didn't want it to end, even if I knew with a cold, hard certainty that it would eventually destroy me. What is it that makes us sabotage the lives we've so carefully built? Is it boredom, neglect, or a deeper, more primal need to feel something, anything, even if it's destructive? Thomas's flight home from his supposed business trip had been delayed, but his meetings had been cancelled, a fact he failed to mention until his black Mercedes pulled into the driveway 2 days earlier than expected. I was in the kitchen, still flushed, my hair a mess from Lucas's mouth on my skin minutes before, when the garage door rumbled open. My stomach plummeted. "Shit," Lucas's voice came from the hallway, low and urgent. I turned just as Thomas's keys jingled at the door. There was no time to fix my smudged lipstick, no way to explain why my blouse was buttoned wrong. Thomas stepped inside, dropping his briefcase heavily onto the marble countertop. "Surprise," he said, but his grin didn't reach his eyes. I forced a brittle smile. "You're early." His gaze flicked past me to Lucas, who was now leaning against the fridge, barefoot and infuriatingly smug. Something cold and unreadable passed over Thomas's face. "You two look busy." The silence stretched for a second too long, thick with unspoken accusations. Lucas smirked. "Just helping Lillian with the groceries." The bags were still in the car. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Dinner that night was a minefield of passive aggression. Thomas watched us over the rim of his wineglass, his questions as sharp and pointed as knives. "Did you finish that report for your internship, Lucas? You're home a lot more lately, aren't you, Lillian?" "What's that on your neck?" I instinctively touched the spot where Lucas's teeth had been hours earlier. A yoga accident." Under the table, Lucas's hand found my thigh and squeezed. Thomas's fork clinked against his plate. "Funny," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "You never liked yoga before." I started locking my bedroom door at night, not to keep Thomas out, but to keep myself from slipping down the hall to Lucas's room. It didn't work. One night I woke to fingers trailing up my thigh, Lucas's breath hot on my neck. "Missed you," he whispered. "Your father's just down the hall," I breathed, a pathetic attempt at protest. "So?" His hand slid higher. "Makes it hotter." The worst part? He was right. We were quiet, quick, desperate. Afterward, as Lucas crept back to his room, I heard it, the distinct creak of Thomas's door opening. I froze. Footsteps padded past my door. The bathroom light flicked on. I extorted a shaky breath. And then I noticed it, Lucas's phone, glowing on my nightstand. He'd left it behind. A new text message illuminated the screen. It was from Thomas. It said, "We need to talk." Lucas laughed it off the next morning. "He's just pissed I missed curfew." But Thomas's stares grew longer, his questions sharper. Then came the morning he accidentally dropped his briefcase, spilling a torrent of papers across the foyer. I knelt to help him gather them and saw it, a receipt from a private investigator, dated the previous day. That night, I poured 2 glasses of bourbon. When Thomas took his first sip, I said it. "I want a divorce." His face didn't change. "It's Lucas, isn't it?" The glass slipped in my hand. Thomas smiled, a cold, knowing, triumphant smile. "I've seen the way he looks at you, Lillian." "And the way you let him." I had expected rage, accusations, a dramatic scene, not this quiet, chilling certainty. He leaned forward. "Leave now, with nothing but the clothes on your back, and I'll pretend I never had to confirm the truth." I packed 1 bag. Lucas was waiting in his truck, the engine running. As we peeled away from the curb, leaving my perfect life behind, my phone buzzed. A final text from Thomas. It simply said, "You will regret this." Lucas glanced at me, a cocky grin on his face. "He's wrong," he said. But as our new, uncertain life began, I couldn't shake one terrifying thought. What have I done? The motel room smelled of bleach and profound regret. Lucas threw our bags onto the bed, one bed, because of course there was only one, and turned to me with that infuriating smirk that used to make my stomach flutter. Now it just made my hands shake. "You okay?" he asked, peeling off his shirt as if we hadn't just detonated our lives. The affair, once a secret, thrilling escape, soured almost immediately under the harsh fluorescent lights of reality. The sex was rougher than before, stripped of its clandestine thrill, leaving only a raw, desperate need. Afterward, as Lucas slept, I crept to the bathroom and vomited until my stomach was empty. Thomas's calculated revenge came 3 days later. First, the bank called. Our joint accounts were frozen. Then, an eviction notice was taped to Lucas's truck window for non-payment of rent on his off-campus apartment, which Thomas had apparently been funding. Finally, an email arrived in my inbox with the subject line, "For your records." The attachments were a series of photos from a hidden camera, showing me pressing Lucas against our fridge. A screenshot of my search history, "Can a stepmother marry her stepson?" and a forwarded message to Lucas's mother in Italy, "Your son has been sleeping with my wife." Lucas's phone blew up within minutes. Texts from his mother, his coach, his friends. He smashed the phone against the motel room wall. I sat very still, staring at the final attachment, a finalized divorce filing with one brutal stipulation. Wife forfeits all marital assets due to proven infidelity. Thomas had planned it all. He had waited patiently and let me walk right into his perfectly laid trap. Lucas started drinking heavily. He'd slam cabinets, grip my wrist too tight during arguments, muttering about how I and Thomas had ruined everything. One night, he came back reeking of cheap perfume that wasn't mine. I pretended not to notice. What right did I have to complain? The final ugly confrontation happened in a Waffle House at 2 a.m. "You used me," Lucas hissed, leaning across the sticky table. "You were bored and I was there, and now you're stuck with me. Admit it." "You miss your big house and your rich husband? Go crawl back to him." I threw my water in his face. He just laughed. I woke up alone the next morning. Lucas's duffel bag was gone. So was the $300 in cash I'd hidden in my sock drawer. His note, scrawled on motel stationery, was short and cruel. "You're not the first, won't be the last." I laughed until I cried. Then I called the only person left who would answer. Thomas picked up on the first ring. "Lillian," was all he said. No anger, no gloating. Just quiet, soul-crushing knowing. I closed my eyes. "I want to come home." The pause lasted a lifetime. Then, "You are home. Look outside." I pulled back the curtain. Thomas's BMW was idling in the parking lot. Waiting, always waiting. I stood there for 10 minutes watching the car, watching my reflection in the grimy window. Smudged mascara, tangled hair, the ghost of Lucas's fingerprints on my collarbone. The phone rang again. Thomas. I let it go to voicemail. Then I packed my remaining bag, left the key on the dresser, and walked out, past the BMW, past the motel office, past everything I thought I wanted. Thomas didn't follow. He didn't have to. Some punishments don't require chains. My future unfolded as a slow, aching reckoning. After leaving the motel, I moved to a small, forgotten town where no one knew my name. I found work at a rundown diner, paid in cash under the table. My hands, once manicured, became permanently stained with coffee grounds and grease. I rented a studio apartment with a leaking faucet and neighbors who fought through the paper-thin walls. The nights were the worst, spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if Thomas ever thought of me, if Lucas had found someone else to destroy. The shame was a constant curdling presence in my stomach. The years blurred into a bleak monotony of survival. My beauty faded into something harder, quieter. I was the kind of woman people glanced at once and immediately forgot. Until one rainy Tuesday, I found myself standing in front of a community college, staring at a brochure. My finger traced the outline of a degree in counseling. Something faint and fragile, something I hadn't felt in years, stirred in my chest. It was the possibility of helping other women who had lost themselves, the way I had. The road ahead was daunting, but not impossible. It was the first shaky step toward a redemption I wasn't sure I deserved. Not grand or dramatic, but small and quiet. The kind of grace that comes only after you've stopped running from yourself. The future was still uncertain, but it was no longer completely hopeless. The weight of my mistakes was still heavy, but it was no longer crushing. The woman in the mirror was finally someone I could live with, if not yet love. And in that quiet acceptance, a new story, one of my own making, could finally begin. We all make mistakes, some small, some life-altering. The real question is what we do after the fall. Do we stay in the wreckage, or do we find the courage to build something new from the ruins? Thank you for walking this difficult path with Lillian today. If her story moved you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of human complexity. And share your thoughts below. Can we ever truly come back from our worst decisions?